The Lord's churches are filled with scared, hurting people. Some people carry a lot of baggage. And let's be honest, we all have baggage, and it affects us in different ways. Some of the people we know have a home life that would break most of us. Yet somehow they pick themselves up each day and they go on with life. In early 2019, ABA Media did a video addressing abortion and unplanned pregnancy in our churches and how churches can better minister to those in such a situation. John Strader, longtime missionary to Africa and now pastor of Heritage Baptist Church in Missouri City, Texas, approached me at the national meeting in Knoxville in 2019 to thank me for that video. He then shared his story and why the video moved him. Now, I've known John for many, many years, and I had no idea of what his childhood was like. And I asked him if he would be willing to share his story with the hopes of it helping others. Thankfully, he agreed. Now, this two-part video series is longer than the videos we usually publish, but I felt that his story needed to be told without interruption. This is a raw, unedited video, and you can see the pain in his face and in his voice as he relives his childhood for us. In part one, he tells us about his parents and his childhood. Part two, he shares how this affected him and his family through the years. And may it move you to help others.
All right, John, I appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
I know this is not an easy subject, but I appreciate your willingness to share with the hopes that it might help others. Tell me a little bit about your mother and father.
Absolutely. So my mother was put up for adoption when she was born. She was born to a teenage mother in Fort Worth, Texas, and she was adopted at 2 days old. Her adopted parents, my grandparents, were a Christian couple that weren't able to have children. And so she is the second child that they adopted out of three. And my grandfather was a Baptist deacon, and he was for over 50 years until he recently passed away. So she was raised with her two other adopted brother and sister, and then after that, they had a biological child. And so that kind of threw off the relationship a bit, and there was a little bit of animosity from them. My mom, when she was a teenager, wanted to seek out her biological parents, and they allowed her to, and she found the lawyer who did the adoption, and he reached out to her original biological parents, and they said, we don't want to be contacted. So from that point on, she was very rebellious. As a teenager, she got into stealing girls' purses at school, started smoking marijuana, things of that nature, basically doing anything she can to be rebellious to the childhood she was raised in. She was raised in a very good Christian home. And by the time she was 17, 18, graduating high school, she ran off with a boyfriend up to the Northeast, New Jersey. And that was when she had her first abortion. From that time on, she was thrown away by that boyfriend, basically, and after he had used her. And then when she moved back to Texas, she was in another relationship, another one of those fly-by-night kind of relationships where she had her second abortion.
All right, and then where did your father come into the picture?
Absolutely. So my father was born down in South Texas to another Christian family. His parents were separated, but when his mom got remarried, she married a preacher, and he also worked for the light company, but he was a good man. They helped raise them 7 kids, and he was raised in a Christian home, but he also went the way of the world when he became old enough to get out of the house, and he got involved with drinking and running with women, and that's actually how he met my mom there in Southeast Houston area. and they were part of that, going to the bar scene, and that's where they met, and they started to see each other, and while they were seeing each other, that's when she had her third abortion, and that was before they were married, and she never told him about it.
Oh,
And after that point, that really put a division there. But they ended up getting married, and it was very, very volatile relationship. But she became pregnant with me
okay.
about a year into their marriage, and she was considering aborting me as well. And she did tell him, and when he found out, he begged her and begged her and pleaded with her not to.
So her third abortion was the child of your father,
Of my father.
but she didn't tell him at the time
Mm-mm.
until after the fact?
Yes, after the fact.
Okay. And so they had to work through that
Mm-hmm.
as best they could, I guess.
I believe that was kind of led to some of the future problems in their relationship. When I was born, they were divorced 2 years later. So they weren't very long together. There was a lot of violence and drugs and alcohol. And I was going back and forth between them, a lot of fighting, a lot of custody battles in courts, and being grabbed from one house and taken to another. That was most of my childhood.
So when she found out she was pregnant with you, her first instinct was to have an abortion, or did something she think about, or when did she let your father know, and that crisis went on?
Of course, I wasn't there at the time,
Oh.
but I believe that was one of her first instincts, because that was basically what she has done up to that point. So I believe that those choices that she's made now 3 times, it makes it easier and easier to make that choice,
Absolutely.
unfortunately.
Right.
And I believe also that part of it had to do with her feeling rejected, unwanted from the time of understanding her adoption and seeking out her biological parents. So she's always had that kind of sense of not being wanted, not being truly loved. And so it's always this, I imagine, from what I know of her, because she's very quiet about this, she doesn't like to tell me about it because of the shame and all of the other things. But I imagine there's a lot of it where she's afraid of being a parent because of the being thrown away, basically, how she felt
Right.
as a child, that she wouldn't want to do that to a child of her own as well. So I think a lot of those aspects dealt into play with it. But because of the marriage, I believe that she gave him a chance at least to talk her off the ledge, so to
Right.
speak.
Right.
And I believe that was able to be worked out, because even when my parents divorced, he got me. And he's always sought me out more when the whole custody situation went on. Even during the process, she used me more of a means to get what she wanted, whether it be financial gain or other aspects of it. Because when I did stay with her, there wasn't much of parenting happening in the home. My mom struggled with drug addiction and different things of that nature most of my childhood. It led to many, many difficult times in my childhood. She spent many times in going to meetings for addiction recovery, like Alcoholics Anonymous,
Right.
Narcotics Anonymous, and even one of the relationships she had with a man in that, because of her not being there, not really active in her parenting, one of her boyfriends molested me as a child.
Word. Oh. How old were you when you found out that she'd had previous abortions, and she was thinking about aborting you?
I think a lot of it came to play when I left her when I was a freshman in high school. We started to really have a lot of problems. She was in her 3rd marriage at this time. And
Has she had any more abortions that you know of?
not that I know of. She's only mentioned it in almost passing, very, very briefly. Most of the information that I was able to get were from some of her longtime friends, my father, some of the other people involved with that circle of friends that they had. So I've had to do most of the investigating because I have a desire to know these things because um, not having the childhood and the family situation that I always desired, I wanted to know about possible brothers or sisters or things like that because I know one day I'll see them in heaven.
Sure, sure. And I think it's just a natural desire to want to know more. Your mother looked for that when she was younger, so
Absolutely.
and of course has nothing against her adoptive parents. I mean, I'm sure they did everything they could.
And they also took a time and they brought me in. My mother was she was in a halfway home from addiction, and they took me in for 2 years.
Wow.
And they were really like my parents.
Right.
And they were very much important to my coming to Christ, even. Because when I was with my mom or my dad, they didn't take me to church. But because of the urging of my grandparents, she took me to a vacation Bible school when I was a young, about third grader. And that's when I came to Christ.
So grandparents should never underestimate the influence they have.
Absolutely.
All right, let me ask you this. In the years since you found out, how did her aborting your father's first child and the consideration of aborting you, how did that affect your father through the years? Has he said anything? What did he, is there any, talk about that?
I know it's bothered him. I don't know all the details. My dad's not the most vocal person when it comes to talking about things, but I know that he loves me. And I know that if that child was here today, he would love that child as well. And he's always done everything he can within his power to help take care of me as I grew up, even while I was living with my mom. And I went back and forth from between them many, many times. And I know it was very difficult to be pulled like that. And unfortunately, I was kind of a toy that was used to almost harm him from my mom's side oftentimes. I don't blame my mom. I know she's been through many difficult things. And that's part of the reason why I've constantly stuck by her side, continue to reach out to her, continue to be there for her anytime I could. It's been very difficult, but I've always felt like her protector. And I've always stuck up for her when other people walked away or said this or that. And so my heart has always been for her. I know she's had difficulties when it's come to walking with the Lord. I believe she has a relationship with Jesus Christ. I know she's talked about it with me before, but her relationship with the local church, her relationship with Jesus is pretty much non-existent when it comes to her daily life. Part of it, I believe that anytime she'd found a place or a church to be a part of, there would always be something where it was a problem that they had with her, or something how they slighted her, or some issue of that nature. I believe a lot of it had to do with undealt with shame, undealt with sin in her life that I believe really caused her to not be able to move past just the baby Christian aspect of it.
Well, being a pastor, people deal with shame and guilt, embarrassment, doing far less dreadful things than abortion. So you can understand that. You were okay. So you talk about how you love your mother. You can understand, maybe not understand, but I think one of the problems as Christians, speaking for me and as pastor, is that we often condemn the woman for having the abortion, but we never really try to figure out what led her to that, because there are so many people that they feel, religious people, church-going people, faithful church-going people. They, you know, when they find out that it's an unplanned pregnancy, they feel like that's their only choice because of shame and things like that. So, you know, and some things we may never find out, but I think as a church and as a community that, we should, that I would hope that my children, my grandchildren, people, that even though I may be disappointed in them, they wouldn't feel like that's their only option.
I think with my mom, her growing up as a young person and dealing with some of the feelings of rejection or being unwanted, I think there was also a struggle with that also in the church. Being a young woman who's had abortions, there's a sense of not being wanted in a church that I can only imagine how she might have felt, because there's a sense of a moralistic sense of churches oftentimes where we lose sight of the grace that is needed for every human being.
All right.
I'm very thankful for the people who have grown up in Christian families and who maybe have not strayed as far as to into the realm of decisions like this, but we all need grace.
All right.
And I believe there were times in her life when grace could have helped her, but it wasn't necessarily extended.
Right.
And that is where the church comes into play, where we as ministers and where God's people must see all of us, no matter what issues are holding us back, as we are the ones holding the hope and the cure to the sin problem that's holding every individual back.
All right.
And that's also been my heart and desire through the years with my mom as well, is I've always tried to be there. Of course, she decides how far you can get close to her with the gospel, but I've always tried to at least be there as an option for her.
Sure.
Because, it's got to be still there to choice.
Right.
A church can't ram it down a young lady's life who's gone down this lane. But they need to know that there's a loving option available to them.
There has to be a desire to be part of that church, but also on the church's part, there has to be a desire to accept. I mean, so it's a two-way street, absolutely. So, getting back to the question about your father, what you know about him, probably a sense of loss that
And
knowing
incompleteness, probably.
right,
I could only imagine from being a father myself,
right,
if one of my children wasn't with me, I would feel definitely a sense of incomplete.
Right.
There's something else that's not there that's supposed to be there.
right. How did this affect? How many siblings?
I have two younger brothers.
Okay, how did this knowledge affect them? I mean, was there any question like when the two brothers are the same father?
So my two younger brothers are from her second marriage.
Okay.
But we were raised together as brothers, very close.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And
Your dad was her first marriage.
Same mom.
Okay.
Different dad. My father was her first marriage.
Okay. All right.
And then she was with her second husband. She had two children, two boys. So us three boys, we were raised really close. But by the time she was divorced from her second husband, he had kind of taken off with the two boys. Again, a lot of it was her desire to have the boys wasn't necessarily desire for them to be their parent, but more so to get what she wanted out of that.
Not so much to nurture.
Yeah, exactly.
Right,
And
right.
so I went off with her, and then the two boys went off with their father. So for about 10 years, they never talked to her. And that was not because of any knowledge of abortion or anything, but that was just because of the parenting situation. And so for them, some of that knowledge came on a bit later, but not to the full extent where I understood it to be. But a lot of that relationship issues and dealing with our childhood being the way it was, I believe also led to a situation where it became very difficult for my youngest brother to continue living in this world when he sought to, and he ended his own life. A lot of that came together for my mom when I sat down with her at the funeral for my younger brother. We sat down together for a
What
meal.
a terrible place to have to discuss that. Terrible time.
It is. It's not fun. And part of the problem was when we sat down together, my brother had not told my mom about the reality of what happened to him. He kind of told her a very vague story, and she wasn't even sure that he had taken his own life. He didn't want to even talk to her about it. That's how far apart they are. So he gave it to me as my responsibility as the oldest. He said, if you want to tell her what happened, you can tell her. And so I felt that this was necessary. She needed to know.
Sure.
And so it was a very hard discussion to begin with. And she, as soon as I explained to her what really happened, she was in just mass denial. How is this possible? You children didn't have that bad of a childhood, did you? And I had to be honest with her. I said it wasn't great. And she's just not recognizing and not remembering some of the things that we had gone through as kids. And she would go to bars at night and leave us three boys in a vehicle outside in the parking lot for hours while she would go into a bar and drink. Then she'd get back in the car drunk and drive around town, driving over curbs and things like that. She'd be passed out for a couple days at a time on prescription medication while I was a 10-year-old taking care of my two younger brothers. So a lot of that stuff she wasn't there for because she was not there.
Right.
Mentally, she was checked out because of the drugs.
Right.
So for her, it didn't really happen. And that was a difficult thing that I had to explain to her because a lot of that stuff she's not carrying around because of this, the being blacked out, because of whatever the case might be. So when we were having that conversation, she's just becoming angrier and angrier. And finally, that was the first time I ever told her about being molested by one of her boyfriends. And that was basically the straw that broke the camel's back, and she just got up and walked away. She couldn't handle it anymore. And from that time on, we basically have not had a relationship.
And that's been the last 3-4 years?
The last 3 years.
You're
or so.
right. I remember that.
Some people had a bad childhood, and it stinks. It really does. No child should be brought up in a dysfunctional home. But you cannot let that define you. We all have memories, but it's how we choose to act on these memories that make a difference. John has every right to be selfish. John has every right to blame others for his circumstances. John has every right to coast through life because of what happened to him. But he made the decision not to. He realized that a person can rise above their circumstances. Now, thankfully, he had people in his life that didn't give up on him. You see, there is hope and forgiveness in Jesus. So I hope from this video you are determined to be the type of person and to have the church that broken people go to in order to be healed. Listen, we are to encourage people not to give up on them. We don't know what they're going through, but God does. And only God can give them the peace and the strength they need.